And of course, Poppy, as you were just talking about there, Secretary Yellen is going to be before the Senate Finance Committee today. Joining us now is one of the members of that committee, Louisiana's Senator Bill Cassidy. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. When Secretary Yellen's before your committee today, what are your top questions for her?
Well, a couple of things. First, there's obviously going to be questions about the bank and the administration's response. If you look at what FDIC kind of should have been doing, or the regulators should have been doing, they clearly weren't doing it. Folks wonder, do we need more regulation? I say, I'm not sure it's the problem with the regulation. It might be a problem with the regulator. That'll be thoroughly explored, and I will be asking about Social Security because I think everybody would have exhausted the bank topic by the time they get to me.
Yeah, we do want to talk about Social Security, but when you just talked about regulation there, you did vote in 2018 on the rollback of some of those regulations. We've heard some Democrats blaming that, saying that is part of what contributed to what happened with SVB. Do you stand by that vote?
Imagine that, a Democrat blaming a Republican when it's a Democratic administration which is asleep at the switch. Never have heard that before, have you? If you look at, I stand by that vote.
With the vote, yeah.
I stand by that vote.
Even though it loosened the oversight when it comes to the banks of this size.
It was not about oversight. What it said is that the regulators had the option, instead of every year doing a stress test, of it wouldn't be mandatory, it would be optional. Now, if you look at publicly traded, if you look at Wall Street looked at this bank back in December, saw that their assets were in long-term, low-interest yielding bonds, and that their liabilities were rapidly going up. And Jerome Powell was saying over and over and over again, we're going to raise interest rates. Now, the regulators should have stepped in, and they should have said, wait a second, we've got low-yield assets, and we've got a high-yield liability, we've got a problem. Wall Street said that. I'm told that people sold the stock short and made hundreds of millions of dollars. So Wall Street gets it, but the regulators don't. Secondly, the value of the bank skyrocketed. And as it skyrocketed, that, I'm told, should have been a warning, a red flag for the regulators to step in and say, bank's exploding in value. Is there some bubble taking place within the bank? They did not do that either. So I think there's a lot of things that you can look at that a wise regulator would have said, this is not good.
So you have a lot of questions for the bank, for the regulators and the people who are supposed to be in charge of this, also people running the bank. But when it comes to that legislation, if some Democrats, as they're moving to maybe reinstate those regulations, you're saying you don't think that's effective? You
know, we have a saying, I'm a doctor, we have a saying in medicine, don't just do something, think. So Washington sees something happen, it's you know, we got to do something. No, you've got to think through the process. Is what we're doing going to be productive? Were the rules in place adequate but just poorly enforced? And now, if it turns out we need more regulations, then do more regulations. But don't just kind of reflexively do something before you know what happened.
Okay, but you are open to potentially doing that once you look into what went wrong here.
Yes, but I will say at this point, it seems more a failure of regulators, not of regulation.
Okay, one thing you've been talking about in the midst of this is Social Security, and you've said you believe Social Security is the SVB of those kind of healthcare systems. Tell me what you mean by that, because I know you've been talking to Senator Angus King and other senators about what a plan to extend and shore up Social Security would look like.
Yeah, so right now Social Security has low-yielding assets. We're in Treasury bills, which might be, and cash, which might be, the T-bills might be, the Treasuries might be yielding 1 to 2 to 3%. And we're in a high inflation environment. The Social Security Trust Fund is going broke in 9 years. The president knows that, but he keeps telling the American people it's no problem. He has not told us what he wants to do. It is going broke in 9 years. At that point, there'll be a 25% cut in what someone who's depending on Social Security, a 25% cut in what they're getting, and the president doesn't seem to care.
Well, I mean, the White House would push back on that, I should say,
How?
because
what is their plan? What is their? He's not announced a plan.
Well, if I interviewed Shalonda Young, the White House budget director, on Sunday. We talked about the White House budget and how they talked about protecting Social Security.
Now, how did they protect it? because yesterday she was asked in committee and she could not give an answer about their plan.
Well, I don't work for the White House, obviously. I'm telling you that we talked to them about what the plan would look like to extend it, to make it solvent after, the next decade, because those are real concerns. So we have talked to them about that. They have pushed back on that, saying, it's also a divided Congress that they're working with. But I do want to ask you about something that a fellow Republican of yours is proposing on Social Security, and that's raising the age, the retirement age. This is something Nikki Haley has proposed for people who are in their 20s and younger now doing that. Is that something you think would be effective?
It depends. To do it by itself would clearly not be effective. What we've done in our approach, by the way, is to create a fund separate from Social Security, separate, but have it a diversified investment fund that would grow and could take up by far the majority of our future obligation. Now, that is an approach that we're taking that the White House could engage with us on. I'll go back to Ms. Young, who I really like, but nonetheless, they've not presented a plan. The president's willing to let this go bankrupt because he doesn't want to talk about it before his reelection. It is irresponsible, it is foolish, and it is wrong for the American people.
You're saying you want to see President Biden come out with a plan that would you be working with the White House on that? Would you negotiate with them on that?
Of course.
Because I think that's been a part of the pushback here.
That's no pushback. I can tell you that we have made ourselves clear that we'd be open to working with the White House. We have a bipartisan group approaching this.
Well, I'm going to say, because the White House, is going to point out what Senator Rick Scott has said about Social Security.
Of course, because that's what they have to retreat to.
Well, he is a fellow Republican of yours.
And, there's a Democrat who said something kind of stupid, too. And so we're going to take one person as an excuse not to engage when the average beneficiary will see a 25% cut.
Well, he's not just an average senator.
Come on, Caitlin, you know better than that. It's one senator saying one thing that the president gloms onto because he doesn't want to actually have to come up with a plan. He's the president of the United States. He should come forward with a plan, or else there'll be a 25% cut for people who currently depend upon Social Security. If that doesn't matter to you, you're either running for re-election, you're too old to care, or you're too rich to need the money.
I do think it matters. I just think we have to note what Senator Rick Scott has said, because that is important here.
Rick Scott has actually retreated from that. I mean, that is a talking point for the president.
We've had him on the program.
But it has no relevance to what we're trying to do. We have a bipartisan solution, approach that we're willing to talk to the White House about, and the White House doesn't want to talk to us.
With your solution that your plan that you've been putting forward, are you going to lay out exactly what that plan would look like? And are tax revenues on the table
as
part of that?
We have an approach. It's not a solid plan yet. The reason it's not a solid plan is because we got to talk to the White House, because they're going to want to have some modification of it.
So you'd have to talk to the White House before you unveiled exactly the specifics
of your plan. Because this is a negotiation. We're so intent on working with the White House that we are willing to keep things kind of on hold. We have an approach until they come forward and say, this is how we think we can do it together. We want to take White House priorities and include it, because I don't want someone who's depending upon Social Security to get a 25% cut, and that's going to happen with the president asleep at the wheel.
I think a lot of people don't want those cuts to happen. But
then why doesn't the White House put up with a plan? They're not doing that.
Well, I think you'll have to ask the White House what that would look like, but they would want to work with you, and they would like to see your plan as well, the specifics of it.
No, we are willing to meet negotiation, but they are so far unwilling to do so.
All right, Senator, thank you so much for your time this morning. We really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Fascinating. Nice job, Caitlin. Nice job, Senator.
That's what you get with the Caitlin Collins interview. She's going to keep asking until you answer the question. No,
I think I answered the question.
It's such an important topic.
Yeah,
Thank you
for my home state of Louisiana, by the way.
For your time.
He's got to go to a call here.
All right, we got to